3 years ago, David Matthews thought he had struck gold when he purchased the Desert Rose Motel in rural Nevada for just 50 cents at a foreclosure auction. The 62-year-old retired mechanic from Phoenix had been searching for an investment opportunity, something to secure his retirement after decades of working with his hands. When he saw the listing for the abandoned roadside motel, complete with 24 rooms and a diner, he couldn't believe the price. Before continuing, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Here we reopen archived cases with respect and proof. The Desert Rose Motel had been closed for nearly 8 years when David made his purchase. Located along a desolate stretch of Highway 95, about 40 miles outside Las Vegas, the property had been abandoned after the previous owner, Eleanor Vasquez, disappeared under mysterious circumstances in 2017. The local bank had been trying to sell the property ever since, but its remote location and the strange circumstances surrounding Eleanor's vanishing had kept buyers away. David saw opportunity where others saw only decay. The motel's neon sign still worked, casting an eerie pink glow across the desert at night. The rooms needed renovation, but the bones of the business were solid. Most importantly, the location was perfect for travelers heading between Las Vegas and Reno, a steady stream of potential customers who needed a place to rest. His wife, Linda, had been skeptical from the beginning. She'd researched Eleanor Vasquez's disappearance online, finding scattered news reports about the 45-year-old motel owner who had vanished one October evening, leaving behind her car, her purse, and no trace of where she might have gone. The police had investigated briefly but found no evidence of foul play. Eleanor had simply disappeared, as if the desert had swallowed her whole. But David was convinced he could make the Desert Rose profitable again. He spent his life savings, nearly $80,000, renovating the property. He replaced carpets, painted walls, updated plumbing, and restored the classic 1960s charm that had once made the motel a popular stop. The diner was converted into a small convenience store and coffee shop. By March 2022, the Desert Rose Motel was ready to welcome guests once again. The reopening was modest but promising. David placed advertisements in travel guides and online booking sites. The first guests were a young couple from California, Sarah and Mike Chen, who were driving to a wedding in Utah. They checked in on a Thursday evening, paid for 2 nights, and seemed pleased with their clean, comfortable room. Friday morning, David knocked on their door to offer complimentary coffee. There was no answer. He used his master key to check the room and found it exactly as housekeeping had left it the day before. Bed unslept in, towels unused, luggage untouched. The couple's rental car was still in the parking lot, keys left on the nightstand. Their cell phones lay charging on the dresser. Sarah's purse contained her wallet, ID, and wedding invitation. It was as if they had simply vanished into thin air. David immediately called the police. Officer Janet Rodriguez from the County Sheriff's Department arrived within an hour. She found the scene as puzzling as David described. There were no signs of struggle, no evidence of forced entry, no indication of where the couple might have gone. The surveillance cameras David had recently installed showed Sarah and Mike entering their room Thursday evening, but never leaving. The investigation was thorough but brief. Police interviewed David extensively, searched the property, and contacted Sarah and Mike's families. The couple was reported missing, and their disappearance made local news. But with no evidence of crime and no leads to follow, the case quickly grew cold. The assumption was that the couple had left voluntarily for reasons unknown, though their abandoned belongings suggested otherwise. David was shaken, but determined to continue. He convinced himself it was a bizarre coincidence. Perhaps the couple had walked into the desert and gotten lost. But when the second disappearance occurred just 3 weeks later, he began to understand that something far more sinister was happening at the Desert Rose Motel. The second disappearance involved Robert "Bobby" Martinez, a 34-year-old truck driver from Albuquerque who regularly traveled the Nevada highways. Bobby was a familiar face to many motel owners along his route, a friendly, reliable man who always paid cash and never caused trouble. He checked into the Desert Rose on a Wednesday night in early April 2022, planning to rest before making his final delivery to Las Vegas the next morning. David remembered Bobby clearly because the truck driver had complimented the motel's renovations and mentioned he might make it a regular stop. Bobby's 18-wheeler was parked in the designated truck area behind the motel, and he'd followed his usual routine: shower, dinner from the vending machines, and early sleep to meet his morning schedule. Thursday arrived, but Bobby never checked out. His truck remained in the parking area, and when David investigated, he found the driver's room in the same impossible condition as the Chen couple's had been weeks earlier. The bed was unslept in, Bobby's clothes were neatly folded on the dresser, and his logbook showed no entries after checking in. His cell phone was plugged into the charger, his wallet contained over $400 in cash, and his truck keys lay on the nightstand. This time David called the police immediately. Officer Rodriguez returned, bringing Detective Marcus Thompson from the state police. The investigation was more intensive than the first, involving a full forensic examination of Bobby's room and truck. They found absolutely nothing. No fingerprints beyond Bobby's own, no signs of struggle, no evidence of where he might have gone. Detective Thompson was troubled by the similarities between the two cases. Both victims had vanished from their rooms without taking any personal belongings. Both disappearances occurred during overnight stays with no witnesses. Both rooms showed no signs of disturbance. The detective expanded his investigation to include the motel's history and Eleanor Vasquez's 2017 disappearance. What he discovered was disturbing. Eleanor's case shared the same impossible characteristics. She had vanished from the motel office one evening, leaving behind her purse, car keys, and no trace of her whereabouts. The investigating officer from 2017, now retired, recalled the case as one of the strangest he'd ever encountered. Eleanor had simply disappeared, as if she'd never existed at all. Detective Thompson began to suspect that the Desert Rose Motel was connected to more disappearances than just these recent cases. He requested missing persons reports from the past decade, focusing on the stretch of Highway 95 where the motel was located. What he found confirmed his worst fears. Between 2015 and 2017, at least 6 travelers had gone missing along this route. 2 were found months later, deceased from exposure in the desert, but 4 others had never been located. All had been traveling alone, all had been seen at various businesses along the highway, and all had simply vanished without a trace. While none could be definitively connected to the Desert Rose Motel, the proximity was troubling. David found himself at the center of a growing investigation. The motel was declared a potential crime scene, and guests were turned away while forensic teams conducted an exhaustive search of the property. They examined every room, every inch of the desert surrounding the motel, and every piece of equipment on the grounds. Ground-penetrating radar was used to search for buried remains. Cadaver dogs were brought in to detect any scent of decomposition. The search yielded nothing concrete, but it did reveal some interesting details about the motel's construction. The building had been modified several times over its 50-year history, with additions and renovations that created unusual architectural features. There were spaces between walls that seemed larger than necessary, and the basement area beneath the diner was more extensive than the building plans indicated. Detective Thompson also discovered that Eleanor Vasquez had not been the motel's original owner. The property had changed hands multiple times since its construction in 1971, and several previous owners had reported strange occurrences. Guests leaving without checking out, unexplained sounds at night, and an unusually high rate of cancellations from repeat customers. As the investigation continued, David's dream investment became a nightmare. The motel remained closed, his savings were exhausted, and he found himself the primary suspect in 3 disappearances. The media attention was relentless, with reporters camping outside his Phoenix home and speculating about his involvement in the vanishings. But the most disturbing discovery came when Detective Thompson traced the property's ownership back to its origins. The Desert Rose Motel had been built on land that was once home to a small mining operation. In 1969, 2 years before the motel's construction, 3 miners had disappeared from the site. Their bodies were never found, and the mining company had abandoned the operation shortly afterward. By late May 2022, the Desert Rose Motel had been closed for over a month, while investigators continued their search for answers. David Matthews had become a pariah in his own community, with neighbors whispering about his possible involvement in the disappearances. His wife, Linda, had moved in with her sister in California, unable to cope with the stress and media attention. The dream investment had become a living nightmare that consumed every aspect of his life. Detective Thompson had expanded his investigation to include federal authorities, given the interstate nature of the missing persons cases. FBI Special Agent Carmen Rodriguez joined the task force, bringing additional resources and expertise in serial crime investigations. The Bureau's Behavioral Analysis Unit was consulted to develop a profile of whoever might be responsible for the vanishings. Despite the intense scrutiny, David made a decision that shocked everyone involved in the case. He announced his intention to reopen the motel. The police investigation had found no physical evidence of wrongdoing, and he was facing financial ruin from the extended closure. His lawyers had advised him that he couldn't be prevented from operating his business without formal charges being filed. The reopening was met with fierce opposition from law enforcement and the families of the missing persons. Sarah Chen's parents flew from California to Nevada, pleading with David to keep the motel closed. Bobby Martinez's sister organized a protest outside the property, holding signs demanding justice for her missing brother. The media coverage was intense, with news crews documenting every development, but David was desperate. His life savings were tied up in the property, and he was facing foreclosure on his Phoenix home. Against all advice, he reopened the Desert Rose Motel on June 1st, 2022. The first night passed without incident, as did the second and third. For a brief moment, it seemed like the nightmare might be over. Lisa Zhang, a 28-year-old software engineer from Seattle, checked into the motel on June 4th. She was driving cross-country to start a new job in Florida and had chosen the Desert Rose specifically because of the media attention. She was curious about the mysterious disappearances and wanted to see the place for herself. Lisa was an amateur true crime enthusiast who documented her travels on social media, and she posted several photos of the motel's retro interior on Instagram. Her final post, uploaded at 11:47 p.m. on June 4th, showed the view from her room window, the desert landscape illuminated by the motel's neon sign. The caption read, "Night 1 at the infamous Desert Rose. So far, so good. The owner seems like a nice guy who's just trying to make a living. Maybe the disappearances really were just coincidences. Time will tell." Time told a different story. Lisa Zhang vanished exactly like the others. David discovered her empty room during his morning rounds. The bed was unslept in. Her luggage remained packed, and her laptop was open on the desk, still logged into her social media accounts. Her rental car sat in the parking lot with the keys inside. Her cell phone was charging on the nightstand, and her purse contained over $300 in cash and all her identification. This third disappearance sent shockwaves through the investigation. The FBI took over the case completely, declaring the Desert Rose Motel a federal crime scene. David was arrested on suspicion of kidnapping and murder, though he was released after 48 hours when no evidence could be found to support the charges. The arrest made national news. The story of the 50-cent motel where guests disappeared became a sensation on social media, with amateur investigators and true crime enthusiasts descending on the Nevada desert. The hashtag #DesertRoseMystery trended on Twitter, and conspiracy theories about the property's dark history spread across the internet. Now I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching us from and the exact time you're hearing this story. We're interested in knowing how far and at what moments of the day or night these documented reports reach. Special Agent Rodriguez implemented a complete forensic reconstruction of the motel. Every square inch was examined for trace evidence, every room was tested for signs of violence, and every piece of furniture was disassembled and analyzed. The investigation expanded to include the motel's septic system, the surrounding desert for miles in every direction, and even the abandoned mine shafts that dotted the landscape. The forensic examination revealed microscopic anomalies that had been missed in previous searches. In Lisa's room, investigators found traces of an unusual sediment that didn't match the local soil composition. The substance was sent to FBI laboratories for analysis, and initial results suggested it contained minerals consistent with underground cave systems. This discovery led to a breakthrough in understanding the Desert Rose Motel's geography. Geological surveys revealed that the property sat atop a network of natural limestone caverns that extended deep into the Nevada desert. These caves had been formed over millions of years by underground water flow and were largely unmapped. More importantly, several cave entrances were located within the motel's property boundaries, though they had been sealed or hidden during various construction projects over the decades. The investigation took on new urgency as teams of spelunkers and cave rescue specialists were brought in to explore the underground network. What they found beneath the Desert Rose Motel would finally explain the impossible disappearances and reveal a horror that had been growing in the darkness for over 50 years. The cave system beneath the Desert Rose Motel was far more extensive than anyone had imagined. FBI spelunkers, working with local cave rescue teams, discovered a labyrinthine network of limestone passages that stretched for miles beneath the Nevada desert. The main cavern, accessible through a concealed entrance behind the motel's maintenance shed, was large enough to house several vehicles and contained evidence of long-term human habitation. Special Agent Rodriguez descended into the caves on June 15, 2022, as part of the first systematic exploration of the underground network. What she found defied explanation and challenged everything investigators thought they knew about the Desert Rose disappearances. The main cavern had been converted into a sophisticated living space, complete with generator-powered lighting, a makeshift kitchen, sleeping areas, and most disturbing of all, a workshop area containing tools and equipment whose purpose became clear only when viewed in context with the missing persons cases. The cave system had multiple levels, with passages connecting to at least 7 different entrances across the desert landscape. Some entrances were natural fissures in the rock, while others had been artificially expanded and concealed. The most significant discovery was a tunnel that connected directly to the basement area beneath the motel's former diner, providing access to the property without ever appearing on the surface. But the caves held more than just evidence of recent criminal activity. Archaeological examination revealed that the underground complex had been used intermittently for decades, possibly longer. There were multiple layers of habitation, suggesting that different individuals had used the caves as a hideout over the years. Carbon dating of organic materials found evidence of human presence dating back to the 1960s, around the time of the original mining operation. The workshop area contained detailed journals and records that painted a chilling picture of systematic predation. The handwriting analysis revealed at least 3 different authors over the years, suggesting that knowledge of the cave system and its potential for concealment had been passed down between individuals. The journals contained detailed observations of motel guests, their routines, their vulnerabilities, and most horrifically, their final moments. Eleanor Vasquez's disappearance in 2017 finally made sense when investigators found her personal effects in one of the deeper chambers. But Eleanor hadn't been a victim. She had been a participant. The journals revealed that she had been using the cave system to prey on lone travelers for years, working with at least one accomplice who had intimate knowledge of the motel's operations and guest routines. The truth was more complex and disturbing than anyone had imagined. The Desert Rose Motel had been a hunting ground for decades, with a succession of owners and accomplices using the hidden cave system to make victims disappear without a trace. Eleanor's own disappearance in 2017 appeared to be the result of a falling out with her accomplice, who had ultimately turned on her when she threatened to expose their operations. DNA evidence found in the caves was matched to multiple missing persons cases dating back to the 1970s. At least 15 individuals had vanished in the area over 5 decades, all lone travelers whose disappearances had been attributed to the hazards of desert travel. The reality was that they had been systematically hunted by predators who used the motel as bait and the caves as their base of operations. The recent disappearances of Sarah and Mike Chen, Bobby Martinez and Lisa Zhang followed the same pattern, but with a new perpetrator. Analysis of the cave's most recent additions revealed that someone had been preparing for David's reopening of the motel, setting up new equipment and updating the living areas in anticipation of resumed operations. Security camera footage from a gas station 15 miles away provided the breakthrough investigators needed. The cameras had captured a figure entering and leaving the Desert Rose property on the nights of all 3 recent disappearances. The individual appeared to know the property intimately, moving confidently in the darkness and avoiding the motel's own security cameras with practiced ease. The figure was identified as Marcus Webb, a 45-year-old drifter who had worked various maintenance jobs throughout Nevada over the past decade. Employment records showed that Webb had done electrical work at the Desert Rose Motel in 2019, 2 years after Eleanor's disappearance. It appeared that he had discovered the cave system during his work and had been planning to resume operations when the opportunity arose. Webb's background revealed a history of violence and predatory behavior. He had served time for assault in 3 different states and had been suspected but never charged in several missing persons cases across the Southwest. Most significantly, investigators found evidence that he had been in contact with Eleanor Vasquez in the months before her disappearance, suggesting that she may have been training him as her replacement. The manhunt for Marcus Webb began immediately, but he had vanished as completely as his victims. His last known address was abandoned, his truck was found burned in a remote area of the desert, and he had withdrawn all his savings from multiple bank accounts. Webb had clearly been preparing for this eventuality, and he had disappeared into the vast expanse of the American Southwest with a substantial head start. The investigation into Marcus Webb's disappearance revealed a disturbing network of individuals who had been connected to the Desert Rose Motel over the decades. FBI analysts, working with cold case investigators from multiple states, began to piece together a pattern of collaboration that extended far beyond a single location. What they discovered was evidence of a loosely organized network of predators who shared information, techniques, and safe houses across the Southwest. Phone records seized from Webb's abandoned residence showed communications with at least 12 individuals across 6 states, all of whom had criminal histories involving violence or property crimes. Several of these contacts were traced to other roadside businesses, motels, truck stops, and diners, located along major highway routes throughout Nevada, Arizona, Utah, and New Mexico. When investigators examined missing persons reports from these areas, they found similar patterns of lone travelers vanishing without a trace. The network appeared to operate through a combination of personal relationships and opportunistic encounters. Members would share information about potential victims, effective methods of concealment, and profitable hunting grounds. They communicated using encrypted messaging apps and code words that made their conversations appear to be about legitimate business activities. Eleanor Vasquez's role in this network became clearer as investigators analyzed her personal computers and phone records. She had been in regular contact with individuals across the Southwest, discussing property maintenance, guest services, and waste management in ways that took on sinister meaning when viewed in context with the cave discoveries. Eleanor appeared to have been a regional coordinator, helping to establish and maintain operational sites throughout the network. The most chilling discovery was a database found on Eleanor's computer that contained detailed profiles of potential victims. The database included photographs, travel routes, financial information, and personal habits of hundreds of individuals who had stayed at various motels throughout the Southwest. The information had been gathered through a combination of surveillance, theft of personal information, and collaboration with corrupt employees at hotels, gas stations, and other travel-related businesses. David Matthews' purchase of the Desert Rose Motel had disrupted this network's operations, but it had also presented an opportunity. Webb's communications showed that he had been monitoring David's renovation activities and planning to resume operations once the motel reopened. The network had viewed David as an unwitting accomplice who would provide cover for their activities while remaining ignorant of what was happening beneath his property. The investigation expanded to include raids on 12 properties across 4 states, all connected to individuals in Webb's communication network. 7 arrests were made, though Webb himself remained at large. The raids uncovered additional evidence of systematic predation, including victim identification materials, weapons, and in 3 cases, human remains. The scope of the crimes was staggering. Conservative estimates suggested that the network had been responsible for at least 40 disappearances over 3 decades, with the actual number likely much higher. Many victims had been lone travelers whose disappearances received minimal investigation, while others had been transients or individuals whose absence wouldn't be noticed for extended periods. The financial aspect of the operation was equally disturbing. The network had been systematically robbing their victims, stealing not just cash and valuables, but also identities, credit cards, and in some cases, vehicles that could be resold in other states. The profits from these activities had been used to purchase and maintain additional properties throughout the Southwest, creating an ever-expanding web of operational sites. Bank records revealed that Eleanor Vasquez had accumulated nearly $800,000 in assets from her participation in the network, money that had been hidden in accounts across multiple states. Webb's financial records showed similar wealth accumulation despite his documented employment history, consisting of low-wage maintenance jobs. The money had been used to purchase safe houses, vehicles, equipment, and in some cases, to bribe local officials who might have otherwise investigated suspicious activities. The network's operational security was sophisticated, indicating long-term planning and criminal experience. Members used burner phones that were regularly replaced, conducted business through intermediaries who were often unaware of the true nature of their activities, and maintained multiple false identities supported by forged documents. They had established relationships with corrupt officials in several counties, ensuring that investigations into missing persons were conducted perfunctorily, if at all. Most disturbing was evidence that the network had been actively recruiting new members, targeting individuals with criminal histories who worked in travel-related industries. They had developed a training program that taught new recruits how to identify vulnerable victims, how to avoid detection by law enforcement, and how to dispose of evidence effectively. The program was distributed through encrypted files that could be quickly deleted if discovered. The arrest of 7 network members provided investigators with crucial intelligence about the organization's structure and operations. Several individuals agreed to cooperate with authorities in exchange for reduced sentences, providing detailed information about Webb's role in the network and his likely hiding places. This intelligence would prove crucial in the ongoing manhunt and in preventing additional disappearances. The manhunt for Marcus Webb became one of the FBI's highest priority fugitive cases in the summer of 2022. Special Agent Rodriguez coordinated with law enforcement agencies across the Southwest, establishing a task force specifically dedicated to capturing the suspected serial killer before he could claim additional victims. The search involved hundreds of agents, local police officers, and civilian volunteers who combed through thousands of square miles of desert terrain. Webb's criminal expertise and familiarity with the Southwest landscape made him an extremely dangerous and elusive fugitive. Analysis of his past activities revealed that he had spent decades learning the remote areas of Nevada, Arizona, Utah, and New Mexico, often working temporary jobs that gave him access to abandoned buildings, mine shafts, and other potential hiding places. His network connections provided him with multiple safe houses and supporters who could offer assistance without being detected by authorities. The investigation into Webb's background revealed a pattern of escalating violence that stretched back to his teenage years. Born in rural Nevada in 1977, Webb had grown up in a household marked by domestic violence and neglect. His father had worked in various mining operations before becoming involved in methamphetamine distribution, and Webb had been exposed to criminal activity from an early age. Juvenile records, sealed until the federal investigation, showed multiple arrests for theft, assault, and animal cruelty. Webb's adult criminal history was equally disturbing, but had never resulted in long-term incarceration. He had served multiple short sentences for assault, theft, and weapons violations, but had consistently avoided prosecution for more serious crimes through plea bargains and witness intimidation. Prosecutors in 3 states admitted that they had suspected Webb of involvement in several unsolved disappearances, but had never been able to develop sufficient evidence for charges. The psychological profile developed by FBI behavioral analysts painted a picture of a highly intelligent and methodical predator who had learned to exploit the weaknesses in rural law enforcement systems. Webb understood that lone travelers who disappeared in remote areas often received minimal investigation, especially if there was no evidence of foul play at the scene. He had perfected techniques for making victims disappear completely, leaving no trace that might trigger intensive searches. Evidence from the cave system beneath the Desert Rose Motel revealed Webb's meticulous planning and preparation. He had spent months preparing for the motel's reopening, installing new equipment, updating living areas, and establishing escape routes that would allow him to vanish if detected. The caves contained multiple exit points, cache supplies, and communication equipment that would support extended periods of hiding. The search for Webb focused on known associates, previous employers, and properties where he might seek refuge. Raids were conducted on abandoned mines, remote cabins, and desert properties throughout the region. Each location was searched thoroughly, with teams using ground-penetrating radar, thermal imaging, and cadaver dogs to detect any signs of Webb's presence or evidence of additional crimes. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Maria Santos, a motel clerk in Flagstaff, Arizona, recognized Webb from wanted posters and contacted authorities after serving him breakfast at her establishment. Security footage confirmed Webb's presence at the motel on July 3, 2022, nearly a month after his disappearance from Nevada. The footage showed him checking in under a false name and paying cash for a single night's stay. Webb's appearance had changed significantly since his last known photographs. He had lost substantial weight, grown a beard, and was walking with a pronounced limp that suggested possible injury. Most importantly, he appeared to be traveling alone and on foot, indicating that his resources and support network might be more limited than investigators had feared. The Flagstaff sighting triggered an intensive search of the surrounding area. Hundreds of law enforcement officers, park rangers, and volunteers combed through the forests and canyons around the city. Bloodhounds tracked Webb's scent to a trailhead leading into the Coconino National Forest, where the trail disappeared on rocky terrain that wouldn't hold footprints. If this case has already caught your attention, leave a like. It helps the story of these missing people reach more people. Search teams established a perimeter around a 50-square-mile area of forest, using helicopters, thermal imaging, and motion sensors to detect any sign of movement. The search was complicated by the rugged terrain, dense forest cover, and numerous caves and canyons where a fugitive could hide. Additionally, the area was popular with hikers and campers, requiring careful coordination to avoid endangering civilians while maintaining search intensity. Webb's knowledge of survival techniques became apparent as the search continued without success. He had left no campfires, no obvious shelters, and no trace of his passage through the forest. Investigators realized they were dealing with someone who had extensive experience living off the grid and avoiding detection in wilderness areas. The search was further complicated by false sightings and tips from well-meaning civilians who thought they had spotted Webb. Each report required investigation, pulling resources away from the primary search area and creating opportunities for the fugitive to move undetected. The media attention surrounding the case had made Webb's photograph widely recognizable, but it had also made the public hypersensitive to anyone matching his general description. 3 weeks into the Flagstaff search, investigators made a grim discovery in a remote canyon, 20 miles from where Webb had last been seen. A makeshift camp contained evidence of recent habitation, including food containers, personal hygiene items, and most disturbingly, items that appeared to belong to Lisa Zhang and other Desert Rose victims. The discovery confirmed that Webb was not only still in the area, but was carrying trophies from his crimes. The discovery of Webb's camp in the Coconino National Forest marked a turning point in the manhunt. FBI forensic teams analyzing the site found not only personal effects from Desert Rose victims, but also detailed journals documenting Webb's movements over the past month. The journals revealed his mental state during his flight from justice and provided crucial insights into his likely next moves. Webb's writings showed a man consumed by rage and paranoia, convinced that he was being persecuted for activities he considered justifiable. The journals contained detailed plans for revenge against those he blamed for disrupting his operations, including David Matthews, Special Agent Rodriguez, and several members of the victims' families who had spoken publicly about the case. Most alarmingly, the writings indicated that Webb was planning to strike back rather than continue fleeing. The forensic analysis of the campsite revealed that Webb had been monitoring news coverage of his case through a battery-powered radio. He was aware of the search efforts and had been deliberately staying ahead of the search teams by moving at night and hiding during daylight hours. The camp showed evidence of sophisticated camouflage techniques and suggested that Webb had been prepared for an extended period in the wilderness. Behavioral analysts studying Webb's journals identified a pattern of escalating desperation and grandiosity. Webb believed that he was engaged in a war against a society that had failed to appreciate his superior intelligence and capabilities. He viewed his victims not as human beings, but as resources to be exploited, and he saw law enforcement officers as obstacles to be eliminated rather than representatives of justice. The journals also revealed that Webb was not as isolated as investigators had believed. He'd been in contact with at least two members of his criminal network who were providing him with supplies and information. Encrypted communications found in the camp showed that Webb was planning to meet with an accomplice who would provide him with weapons, transportation, and false identification documents. This intelligence led to a breakthrough in the investigation. FBI agents identified the accomplice as Raymond "Ray" Kowalski, a 52-year-old mechanic from Phoenix who had been arrested during the earlier network raids, but had been released on bail pending trial. Surveillance of Kowalski's movements revealed that he was preparing to travel to Arizona with supplies that could support Webb's continued flight from justice. The FBI made the decision to allow Kowalski's meeting with Webb to proceed under controlled circumstances. The plan was to follow Kowalski to the rendezvous point and capture Webb when he appeared to collect the supplies. The operation required careful coordination between multiple agencies and posed significant risks, as Webb was known to be armed and had demonstrated his willingness to use violence. Kowalski's journey to the meeting point was monitored by surveillance teams using aircraft, ground units, and electronic tracking devices. The rendezvous was scheduled to take place at an abandoned gas station on Highway 89, about 40 miles south of Flagstaff. The location was remote enough to avoid civilian casualties, but accessible enough for law enforcement to establish effective containment. On July 28, 2022, at approximately 10:30 p.m., Kowalski arrived at the abandoned gas station carrying a backpack and duffel bag. Surveillance teams confirmed that the bags contained food, medical supplies, ammunition, and a disassembled rifle. Kowalski waited in his vehicle for nearly an hour before Webb emerged from the desert darkness, approaching the meeting point on foot. The arrest operation began as Webb approached Kowalski's vehicle. FBI snipers had established positions around the gas station, while tactical teams prepared to move in from multiple directions. The goal was to take Webb alive if possible, both to prevent additional violence and to obtain information about other network activities and potential victims. Webb's paranoia proved justified as he immediately sensed the presence of law enforcement officers. Rather than attempting to flee, he produced a handgun and began firing at Kowalski's vehicle, apparently believing that his accomplice had betrayed him. Kowalski was wounded in the initial exchange, but survived by taking cover behind his truck's engine block. The firefight that followed lasted approximately 20 minutes, with Webb using the abandoned gas station's buildings for cover while engaging multiple law enforcement positions. He demonstrated sophisticated tactical knowledge, suggesting military or law enforcement training that had not appeared in his official background records. Webb's shooting was accurate and deliberate, forcing officers to maintain defensive positions while attempting to contain his movements. The confrontation ended when Webb appeared to run out of ammunition and attempted to flee on foot into the surrounding desert. FBI agents had anticipated this possibility and had established containment positions throughout the area. Webb was cornered in a narrow canyon where his options for movement were limited, but he continued to resist capture. In the final moments of the manhunt, Webb made a desperate attempt to take his own life rather than face arrest and prosecution. He had kept one bullet in reserve and placed his weapon against his head while shouting threats and demands at the surrounding officers. FBI negotiators attempted to talk him into surrendering, but Webb's mental state had deteriorated beyond rational communication. The confrontation concluded when Webb collapsed from blood loss caused by a wound sustained earlier in the firefight. He was immediately treated by FBI medical personnel and transported to a trauma center in Flagstaff, where he underwent emergency surgery. Webb survived his injuries but remained in critical condition for several days under constant guard by federal agents. The capture of Marcus Webb ended the most intensive manhunt in recent FBI history and brought closure to the families of his victims. But the investigation was far from over, as authorities worked to identify additional crimes, locate more victims, and dismantle the remaining elements of the criminal network that had operated throughout the Southwest for decades. Marcus Webb's capture marked the beginning of the most complex criminal prosecution in Nevada state history. Webb survived his injuries and was subsequently charged with multiple counts of kidnapping, murder, and conspiracy across 4 states. The evidence against him was overwhelming, but his case would reveal additional horrors that had been hidden beneath the Desert Rose Motel and throughout the Southwest for decades. Webb's initial interrogations yielded little useful information, as he refused to cooperate with investigators and maintained his innocence despite the overwhelming evidence. However, his journals and the material evidence found in the cave system provided prosecutors with a detailed record of his crimes and those of his accomplices. The psychological evaluation ordered by the court revealed a diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder with narcissistic features, confirming what behavioral analysts had suspected about his mental state. The prosecution team, led by U.S. Attorney Sarah Williams, faced the challenging task of organizing evidence from multiple jurisdictions and decades of criminal activity. The case involved testimony from over 200 witnesses, including survivors of network attacks, family members of victims, and law enforcement officers from across the Southwest. The physical evidence filled an entire warehouse and included DNA samples, personal effects, forensic reconstructions, and detailed maps of the cave systems. David Matthews, the unwitting purchaser of the Desert Rose Motel, became a crucial witness in the prosecution. His testimony about the strange occurrences at the motel and his cooperation with the investigation helped establish the timeline of recent events. David's experience highlighted the devastating impact that criminal networks could have on innocent individuals whose only mistake was being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The families of Webb's victims played a central role in the legal proceedings, providing victim impact statements that demonstrated the human cost of his crimes. Sarah Chen's parents spoke about the devastation of losing their daughter just as she was beginning her career and planning her wedding. Bobby Martinez's sister described the impact on their elderly mother, who died without ever learning what happened to her son. Lisa Zhang's family shared memories of her adventurous spirit and her dreams of exploring the country before settling into her new career. The cave system beneath the Desert Rose Motel continued to yield evidence as investigators worked to identify all of Webb's victims. Forensic anthropologists examined human remains found in the deeper chambers using dental records, DNA analysis, and personal effects to identify individuals who had disappeared over the past 3 decades. Each identification brought closure to another family, but also added to the growing tally of Webb's victims. The investigation revealed that Webb had been far more prolific than initially suspected. Evidence linked him to at least 23 disappearances across the Southwest, with strong circumstantial evidence suggesting his involvement in additional cases. The systematic nature of his crimes and his meticulous record-keeping provided prosecutors with an unprecedented view into the mind and methods of a serial killer. Webb's trial began in March 2023, nearly a year after his arrest. The prosecution presented a methodical case that traced Webb's evolution from small-time criminal to serial killer, showing how his association with the Desert Rose Network had provided him with the knowledge and opportunity to commit increasingly sophisticated crimes. The evidence included detailed reconstructions of the cave system, forensic analysis of victim remains, and testimony from network members who had agreed to cooperate with authorities. The defense team, led by veteran criminal attorney Michael Rodriguez, faced an impossible task given the overwhelming evidence against their client. They focused on challenging the prosecution's timeline, questioning the chain of custody for physical evidence, and arguing that Webb's mental illness diminished his responsibility for his actions. However, their efforts were undermined by Webb's own journals, which demonstrated clear premeditation and awareness of the criminality of his actions. The trial lasted 4 months and attracted national media attention as details of the Desert Rose network were revealed to the public. The case became a symbol of the vulnerabilities faced by travelers in remote areas and highlighted the need for better coordination between law enforcement agencies when investigating missing persons cases across state lines. Webb was convicted on all charges in July 2023, receiving multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole. The judge, in pronouncing sentence, described Webb's crimes as among the most heinous in the court's experience and noted that the systematic nature of his offenses demonstrated a complete disregard for human life and dignity. The convictions of Webb's accomplices followed similar patterns, with most receiving lengthy prison sentences in exchange for their cooperation with authorities. Raymond Kowalski, who had been wounded during Webb's capture, received a reduced sentence of 25 years in prison for his role in the network. Several other network members accepted plea bargains that resulted in sentences ranging from 15 to 40 years. The Desert Rose Motel remained closed throughout the legal proceedings, its reputation irreparably damaged by the revelations of what had occurred beneath its floors. David Matthews eventually sold the property to the federal government for incorporation into a nearby wildlife preserve, ensuring that it would never again serve as a hunting ground for predators. The caves were sealed permanently, becoming a tomb for the memories of those who had perished in their depths. 3 years have passed since Marcus Webb's conviction, and the impact of the Desert Rose Motel case continues to resonate throughout law enforcement communities across the United States. The investigation revealed systematic failures in how missing persons cases were handled in rural areas and led to significant reforms in how agencies coordinate when dealing with crimes that cross jurisdictional boundaries. The FBI established a new unit specifically dedicated to investigating missing persons cases that occur along major highway corridors. The Highway Serial Killings Initiative, partly inspired by the Desert Rose investigation, coordinates information sharing between local, state, and federal agencies to identify patterns that might indicate serial criminal activity. The program has already resulted in the identification and arrest of several suspects who had been operating undetected for years. David Matthews never recovered from his experience as the unwitting owner of a serial killer's hunting ground. The financial losses from the failed investment, combined with the psychological trauma of learning about the horrors that had occurred beneath his property, led to severe depression and anxiety. David and his wife Linda divorced in late 2023, and he now lives in a small apartment in Phoenix, working part-time as a security guard. The dreams of comfortable retirement were replaced by nightmares about the victims whose disappearances he had inadvertently facilitated. The families of Webb's victims found varying degrees of closure through the legal proceedings, but the pain of their losses remained profound. Sarah Chen's parents established a foundation that provides support to families of missing persons, focusing on cases that receive insufficient law enforcement attention. Bobby Martinez's family worked with trucking associations to improve safety protocols for drivers who travel remote highways regularly. Lisa Zhang's parents advocated for better communication between social media companies and law enforcement when users disappear while documenting their travels online. The Desert Rose property itself became a symbol of evil that attracted morbid curiosity from true crime enthusiasts and amateur investigators. Before its conversion to federal land, the site was plagued by trespassers who wanted to see the location where so many people had disappeared. Some visitors claimed to experience paranormal phenomena, reporting strange sounds and unexplained sensations near the sealed cave entrances. Local authorities eventually posted permanent security to prevent unauthorized access to the property. Special Agent Carmen Rodriguez, who had led the investigation from its early stages, was promoted within the FBI and became a national expert on serial crimes involving missing persons. She frequently speaks at law enforcement conferences about the importance of taking missing persons reports seriously, regardless of the apparent circumstances of the disappearance. Rodriguez's work on the Desert Rose case became a model for how complex investigations involving multiple jurisdictions and decades of criminal activity should be conducted. The criminal network that had operated throughout the Southwest was largely dismantled through the arrests and prosecutions that followed Webb's capture. However, investigators believe that some members remain at large and that similar networks may be operating in other parts of the country. The case highlighted the vulnerability of travelers in remote areas and the need for continued vigilance by both law enforcement and the traveling public. Marcus Webb remains incarcerated at ADX Florence, the federal supermax prison in Colorado. He has never shown remorse for his crimes and continues to maintain his innocence despite the overwhelming evidence against him. Prison officials report that Webb spends his time writing what he claims are memoirs, though the documents are heavily monitored and have revealed no additional information about undiscovered crimes or victims. The investigation into the Desert Rose network officially concluded in December 2024, but cold case investigators continue to examine unsolved disappearances that might be connected to the group's activities. Advanced DNA analysis and improved forensic techniques have allowed investigators to identify additional victims and provide closure to families who had waited decades for answers about their missing loved ones. The case also sparked academic interest in the psychology of serial criminals and the dynamics of criminal networks. Several universities have established research programs that study how predators identify and exploit vulnerable populations, using the Desert Rose investigation as a case study. The research has contributed to improved training for law enforcement officers and better protocols for protecting potential victims. Eleanor Vasquez's role in the network remained one of the investigation's most disturbing aspects. The discovery that she had been not a victim but a perpetrator challenged assumptions about who might be capable of such systematic evil. Her case became a subject of study for criminal psychologists seeking to understand how women become involved in serial killing networks and what motivations drive their participation. The sealed caves beneath the former Desert Rose Motel have become an unofficial memorial to the victims of the network's crimes. Family members and friends of the disappeared sometimes visit the site to leave flowers and personal mementos, creating a makeshift shrine that honors the memory of those who were taken from the world too soon. The site serves as a reminder that evil can hide in the most unexpected places and that vigilance is the price of safety in an uncertain world. The Desert Rose case stands as one of the most significant serial crime investigations in American history, not only for the number of victims involved, but for the systematic nature of the crimes and the length of time they went undetected. The investigation revealed how predators could exploit gaps in law enforcement coordination and the vulnerabilities of travelers in remote areas to commit crimes on an unprecedented scale. As the sun sets over the Nevada desert, where the Desert Rose Motel once stood, the landscape appears peaceful and unchanged. But beneath the surface, in chambers now sealed forever, lie the remnants of one of the darkest chapters in American criminal history. The victims are remembered not as statistics, but as individuals whose lives were cut short by evil, and their stories serve as a warning to future generations about the dangers that can lurk in seemingly ordinary places. Subscribe to our channel to explore more archived and disturbing cases. Thank you for following the story of the Desert Rose disappearances. See you in the next video. The Desert Rose Motel may be gone, but the lessons learned from its dark legacy continue to protect travelers and guide investigators in their pursuit of justice for the missing and the forgotten.